There it is. Okay, so we talked about the Renaissance, and we talked about the Reformation, and we talked about the Enlightenment. Y'all remember talking about the Enlightenment, right? With all the, everybody has individual worth, and the scientific revolution making such a big deal. And if you can understand things using scientific method, then you can understand people using scientific method and all of that. What the Enlightenment kicks off is the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so because there is now access to science and because people are doing scientific-y kinds of things, the Industrial Revolution really kicks off. Okay, and in the wake of the Industrial Revolution, you have things like big crowds of people tromping into their factories in the morning and whole hours of their lives being eaten up by major industry. And so there's basically a kickback at the Enlightenment. So there's the Enlightenment, and then there's something called the counter-enlightenment that kicks back at all this industry and science and technology and innovation that seems like a good idea but causes more problems than it solves. So the Industrial Revolution, the Enlightenment starts in the 1600s and goes until like the 1800s. Overlapping with that is what's called the counter-enlightenment. We call it the Romantic period, and I don't want you to get the wrong idea. Romantic in this sense does not mean full of love and sunshine and butterflies. It means kind of like the Romans, okay? So it's basically a time period where people are reaching back and looking at the practices of ancient Rome, the ideologies, the philosophies of ancient Rome, and then pulling them back in. And one of the things that Rome really liked to do was ask questions. So the reason that people are kicking back at the Enlightenment is because there are good things that come out of the Enlightenment, but there are bad things too. The Enlightenment is responsible for the French Revolution. The idea that every single person has value is a great idea. That's the French Revolution. But killing 30,000 people and beheading them because they're associated with the monarchy is bad. And that's a natural side effect of the Enlightenment and the effect of the French Revolution. General Bonaparte climbing up through the ranks and becoming part of a military structure that saves France from its own self-destruction is good. But Emperor Bonaparte deciding that now France needs to spread over the entire continent and take over all of Europe is bad. So the reason why people have a counter-enlightenment is because the Enlightenment is difficult for them. I like this picture. Take a look at this picture. Okay, so this is the scientific revolution in action. Can y'all see what this is? Can you see what's going on in this picture? Can you make it out at all? I could try to turn the light off, but you know, anytime I mess with technology. Let's see.
Oh, this is what we talked about on the other car.
Yeah, somewhat. Except we're going to do it more. Oh, American? No. That probably wouldn't it. But the projector is still working. So I'm making progress. Anyway, can y'all see what's going on in this picture at all? Okay, there's a man who's doing an experiment on a bird. Basically what he's doing is that he's sucking all of the oxygen. What is wrong with you? Okay. He's sucking all of the oxygen out and creating a vacuum, which is going to kill the bird. This is a scientific experiment. Isn't it fascinating? Now look at the faces of all the people around this science experiment that's happening. What do you see?
Fear.
All right, they're terrified, they're disgusted. The little girl down here is just really unhappy, looking up at this poor bird that's gonna die. The people back here are hiding. This woman is actually physically hiding her face, even though people are saying, no, 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 you have to look because it's science and science is fascinating. This painting is what the counter-revolution is, or the counter-enlightenment is really about. It's people who are troubled by how strong an influence science has on the new culture. But Romanticism is really kicked off by a movement that we call Sturm und Drang, which is a German for storm and urgency. So in 1777, a German playwright wrote a play about the American Revolution, which kicked off in 1776. So in 1777, he wrote a play about it, and he used sound effects and shouting and sudden movement on the part of the actors to create jump scares, to evoke an emotional reaction from the audience. And that was the first time that had ever happened. Nobody had ever tried that on the stage before, believe it or not. up until this point, you didn't really want your audience to be emotionally involved in your play past a certain point. Like the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet, really tragic, but you wanted them to go, yeah, that's sad. You didn't want them weeping. You just wanted them to be like, oh, that is sad. But you didn't really want them invested because you wanted them to be able to think, you know, dialogue is important. You don't want them to lose it. The idea of creating an entire play just to get the audience emotionally invested was brand new. They used the American Revolution to do it. And it was so popular, it had such a strong effect, that it began to sweep through every other part of literature, and the ideology of what that revealed became really important. So the scientific revolution had this sort of, you know, idea that when you uncover facts, you find knowledge. That's the point of the scientific revolution. The Enlightenment said that the more knowledge you had, the more power you had. So that should be your first priority, should be uncovering facts so that you can create knowledge, because that gives you power. What Romanticism said was there's something on the other side of knowledge that's more important, and that is truth. And that's something you can't get from facts. That's something you can only feel. Truth is the real power. So what this kicks off is this whole new idea that facts can reveal certain things. Knowledge, you can only get that through your five senses, and your five senses are very limited, right? Your five senses, what you see and what you smell and what you touch and what you hear, those can only tell you so much. To the scientific revolution, that was the most important thing, is what you could get through your senses. Truth, on the other hand, can only come from within you. It can only be a part of where you are. Your emotions are what guide you to the truth. So if your emotions guide you in a completely opposite direction from facts, that's actually okay, because truth is more important than facts. That was what the counter-enlightenment said. It also believed that genius could only come from something that was original. So if you were a genius scientist during the Enlightenment, that meant that you had figured out how to take all of these facts and put them together and test them and figure out something. And that made you a genius. To the counter-enlightenment, genius was, none of that counted because you didn't actually think of it yourself. In order to be a genius, you had to have a new idea that sprang from nowhere. So these are very, very different movements, and it's reflected in some of the things that they embrace. For example, heroes. An Enlightenment hero was somebody who was part of the world, who was educated, scientific, who solved problems with his brains, who wanted to be part of a civilization, who wanted to work with the police, who wanted to work with the guards, you know, somebody who wanted to be a part of the structure, support the king, you know, in whatever story you're talking about. So like Robinson Crusoe is a really good Enlightenment hero because he used his brain powers and his science to solve problems, and all he ever wanted was to get back and bring glory to his country through his, you know, achievements. He wanted to be a part of it. Captain Picard of Star Trek The Next Generation is a great Enlightenment hero because he wants to be part of the Federation. He wants to be part of it. I don't know if y'all even know who that is, but yeah, okay. Right, but that was an Enlightenment hero. Romantic heroes are naive and youthful and innocent and not bogged down with all that knowledge. They're not like, you know, constantly, you know, looking for the answer in books. They look for the answer inside themselves. They want to be intuitive, yes. Yeah, it's about following your heart. Yes, exactly. That's the important thing. It's not to follow your brains, it's to follow your heart. And romantic heroes want to be outside of civilization and want to walk away from civilization and be part of nature instead. Can you all think of any romantic heroes off the top of your head? People that start off not a part of society, that use their guts to solve problems instead of then fight against the power to do it and all of that kind of stuff. Can you think of any that aren't actually romantic heroes? It's hard to find Enlightenment heroes now.
King Arthur is an Enlightenment hero, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's not romantic.
Yeah, King Arthur was an Enlightenment hero. Let's say, what was the number one that came up when we did this? And Harry Potter. Harry Potter is a romantic hero because Harry Potter was young and innocent, naive. He lived outside of the society because he wasn't brought up in the wizarding world. Very much an Enlightenment hero, but who is it that she supports? Harry. He outranks her. He outranks the people that are smarter than him because he uses his guts. So he's very much a romantic hero. So this shows up in literature across Europe. All of a sudden, boom, there's all of these romantic authors, poets who are writing, and their heroes are very sensitive and conflicted and excitable. And the novels are designed to shock and surprise the readers. The novels are designed to do things like Percy Shelley's Frankenstein, for example. The whole point of that was to make the reader come away with it like, I don't know how to feel about this. Do I feel sorry for the monster? Like to be conflicted when they finish it. It happened all across Europe, but it really took off in America. We have a couple of really good romantic authors in America. James Fenimore Cooper, for example, began to write books specifically designed to show Europeans how romantic America was. How much of a part of, how if you come to America, all of your emotions you'll be moved to tears by the beauty of the place and how close to nature everything is. And he liked specifically to write about things where people ended up feeling conflicted about who to support. The Last of the Mohicans, for example, is a sweeping landscape and all of these like pages and pages and pages of description of nature, which is why it's hard to read. But in the midst of that, you have this hero who's Daniel Bonner, who was raised from a young boy by the Mohican people who are now dying out, and he and Chingachgook, his adopted father, are the last of their people, and they save the general's daughters from death. And that little segment of that movie that I made y'all watch for the French and Indian War was from Last of the Mohicans. It's a very romantic story, and I don't just mean that it's full of love, which it is, because it's all about the love affair between these two, the general's daughter and anyway. But also because the hero of the story is the one that's outside of the civilization. He's outside of the society. Rip Van Winkle and Legend of Sleepy Hollow were written by Washington Irving, which was a romantic novelist. He loved to take people and put them outside of society against their will, and then force them to embrace their emotions, whether they liked it or not. Okay, so he took people like, Ichabod Crane, who was a school teacher who was climbing up the ranks in, and I'm not talking about the Johnny Depp one. I'm sorry. I wish I was. That would be nice. But I'm talking about the actual story where he was a school teacher. He fit into society exactly where he was supposed to. He was climbing up the ranks. He was intelligent. But because he's being chased by a headless horseman, he suddenly has to lean on his emotions. So Washington Irving loved to do stuff like that. Have y'all ever heard the story of Rip Van Winkle? Do you know what that's about? Rip Van Winkle is a man who falls asleep in the woods and wakes up like, 100 years later or something? Yeah, he wakes up and he's been asleep for, I think it's like 40 years, but I don't really remember. It's been a long time. Yeah, Johnny Appleseed was real, but the reason why he was a romantic hero is because he left society and trusted his instincts, and et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, part of what fueled the counter-enlightenment was people who believed that the Enlightenment thinkers had been wrong. And one of them was this guy, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, see, John Locke and Thomas Hobbes, they believed that at their core, people are bad. So if you don't build a society out of them, then they'll just continuously steal from each other until they kill each other. And that's human nature. Okay, we have a moral code that tells us when things are right and wrong, but we circumvent that moral code in order to protect ourselves. And so that we won't have to circumvent that moral code, we form society so that we can protect each other, so that we don't have to break the law and steal things from each other. But if we were left to our own, we would. Any of y'all Walking Dead fans? No? Okay, I'm lonely. Okay, so what happens when you take the Walking Dead dystopian society, you put a group of people together and they have to travel across the country. You have two different kinds of people that you meet. You have people like our heroes who who take care of each other, who travel with a screaming baby for like 2 whole seasons or something. I don't even get that. And then you have the people who just basically take whatever they want, okay? Thomas Hobbes and John Locke believed everybody was that second kind. Like if you cut all the rules of society, people just take whatever they want. Rousseau believed that society was actually that first kind, that if you leave people to their own devices, they will be kind to each other. And the thing that makes them mean to each other is when you give them private property to own. So the best thing you could do for all of society would be to take away all of everybody's private property, make everything belong to everybody, and nobody really own anything, and then society would be perfect. This is where Marx gets his ideas, okay? Is from this counter-enlightenment thinker. One of the ways that this affects America, the landscape of America, is the belief that each individual person should receive education is an idea of the Enlightenment. Every child should be educated because every individual has worth. That's an idea of the Enlightenment. So Thomas Jefferson believed that the best thing he could do for the country was make sure that everybody had access to an education, because the smarter everybody was, the better country we would have. So he started all these little red schoolhouses all across the land so that the children of the poor could come to school. In these schoolhouses, they learned the 3 R's. Do you all know what the 3 R's are? Reading, writing, and arithmetic. See that face you're making? That's precious. No, only one of those actually starts with an R. Anyway, but the reading, writing, and arithmetic was what they were taught. How to do the basic skills of education. How to read, how to write, and how to do math. And that was it. In the wave of Romanticism, people looked at that and thought, we're missing a big chunk of what's really now. Do you have to do that now? Hedge trimming? No. Anyway, sorry, he's just right outside the window. In the wake of Romanticism, they said that we're missing something here. It's not enough just to teach them how to have facts. You need to teach them truths. You need to teach them how to learn all these other subjects. They need to learn science, but they also need to learn social studies. They also need to learn how the world fits together. And they also need to learn important ideas like patriotism and idealism, morality. So the schoolhouses, say again? Oh yeah, it's all through infused. If you graduated from an American high school, you were taught to be patriotic. Like that's infused in every subject of high school. It's subtle and it's more subtle in some places than others, but you're still taught. Like history is written in such a way to make you, idealistic and moral and patriotic, things like that. So it's still in the foundation of education that it's not enough to graduate a kid with the basic skills. You also have to graduate them with a sense of civic responsibility, with a sense of ideology. You got to get them to dream. How many of y'all remember various and sundry programs throughout school that taught you to dream big, strive, reach for the stars? Like it's not enough for you to just learn the skills and go home and work whatever job your parents worked. You gotta strive. Well, that's a result of the Romantic period in American education, and it's still there. We're still doing it. In religion, this took a slightly different flavor. So the religion of the Enlightenment was what we call deism. It was basically the idea that God created the whole universe and created people with a moral code, left them in charge, and basically then God basically took hands off the universe and said, okay, go. And that God is not actually present. Okay, that's deism. Benjamin Franklin was a deist. He believed that God had set up the universe and then left it to humans to run their little planet of it, and that was all there was. The God otherwise wasn't really directly involved, okay? And the reason for that was because of the scientific revolution. We could make a case for there being a creator, but we can't make a case for there being a God here now under science. So probably there isn't. So basically what we need to do is take care of what's been given to us. That's the Enlightenment. Romanticism says that you know in your heart that God is actually with you. You know in your heart that your creator is trying to reach you right now, that particular bird flying across the tree right now, you feel in your heart that that's about you, that all of this kind of centers on you. That being the case, probably all of the parts of the Bible that don't really apply to you don't really matter as much, because in your heart you know what's true, right? That's Unitarianism. I don't know that we've ever diverged from the Old Testament, but that's getting into theology. What I'm saying is the Romantic movement was to think of God as constantly changing, kind of, reaching you in your heart, that it was more about your emotions and all of that kind of stuff. So that gave birth to several different religious movements. One of them was the Second Great Awakening. So Methodist and Baptist preachers and Presbyterian preachers actually come out and start having big revivals in the early 1800s. There's this, because The English have been kicked out of America. The English priests, the Anglican priests, have gone back to England. And what's left instead is, for example, the Methodist Church, which was part of the Anglican Church, but in America isn't anymore. It's like, now it's a separate body. Now it's a new church all of its own. Okay, so those preachers have to continue to spread them, and they're very excited about their messages. They're so on fire for all this. So they start having what's called camp meetings, which is basically where people come and live on a campground for like a week and have a revival that lasts all week. And sometimes weeks, sometimes longer. Sometimes it takes so long for a camp meeting to break up that they just build a campground there. We actually have those here in Texas, camp meetings that never shut down. That they were so long lasting that they just built a campground there, and then people come every weekend and have events there. Okay, those camp meetings turned into campgrounds. But for the most part, what this means is that a whole new revival for a whole new generation. And the message that they're being given is nothing about predestination. It's all about God in your heart, and feel that emotion and let it roll over you and get all excited in the spirit. This really appeals to certain populations. For example, the slaves that have come over from Africa, this is how they worship, with music and with movement and with shouting, and all these things are part of their holistic worship that they had back in Africa. So this is what's been missing for them from the come into church and sit down with your hands folded and be quiet worship that they're used to. So the camp meetings actually cause more freedmen and slaves to decide to become preachers. And so they begin to start their own congregations within the slave population. And the messages get a little jumbled because there are a lot of preachers that come into this that don't know how to read. And so they're like, I think this is what the Bible says, but I wouldn't know. But I'm pretty sure this is what it says. So some of it gets a little jumbled, but it's a whole different movement of religion. This also happens among the Native Americans, and you end up with people drawing a connection between this creator God and the Great Spirit, you know, and you have Native American religions that spring up that have their own flavor. The religion of the Protestant people becomes transcendentalism. Transcendentalism means you have to really get at the truth of your spirit. You really have to figure out what your spirit really means and what it's really for. And once you do, you realize that all of our spirits are connected to each other. And they call this phenomenon the oversoul. We're all connected by an oversoul that lets you know. That's why you can tell what's right and wrong, because the great connected spirit of all of us tells us what's right and wrong. Okay, that's why you can feel in your conscience when something, so you should get really closely connected to your conscience. You should ask your conscience what's the right thing to do regularly, every day, all the time. Everything you do should be centered on that. And then, you know, this also lends the idea that if you feel like you're by yourself, but you're making a stand for the right thing, you're not really alone, because your spirit is connected to all the spirits that are also doing the right thing. Certain writers really capitalizing on this point, the idea that if you're doing the right thing, if you can rely on your own sense of right and wrong, then you are in the majority, even if you feel like you're the only one doing it. Even if you're the only one who's shouting, this is wrong, we have to stop this. There's this whole soul full of right that is standing there with you, which encourages people to do that, to stand up for what's right, which is kind of an interesting question in the 1800s in America, when their Trail of Tears is happening, and when slavery is still a thing, and when factories are being opened and people are working all hours of the day. The idea that anybody has the ability to stand up alone for and say, this is wrong, we can't keep doing this. It's a pretty powerful thing. So we have some transcendental writers. We have Ralph Waldo Emerson, who wrote Self-Reliance, which is an essay in which he basically says, reach for the right listen to your conscience and rely on that part of yourself in the face of everything else that's happening. We have Walt Whitman, who writes the poetry, Leaves of Grass and Songs of Myself, which are poems that basically embrace nature and make nature a reflection of the inner soul. And then we have Henry David Thoreau, who was a student of Ralph Emerson. Henry David Thoreau, who wrote about nature, who lived in nature, actually. He abandoned all society and lived in nature for a while. And then he also allowed himself to be arrested rather than pay a tax that he knew was going to support a war that he didn't support, which was the fight with Texas. He decided to allow himself to be jailed rather than pay that tax. And from inside jail, he wrote the essay Civil Disobedience, which basically said that, which said, it may seem to the rest of the world like I'm alone in protesting this tax and that my little amount is not going to make any difference, but I know I'm not alone because I'm doing the right thing, and therefore I'm bigger than the combined force of everybody that's doing the wrong thing. And that became the inspiration for Martin Luther King Jr., for Gandhi, for Mother Teresa, for, you know, all kinds of protest movements have used what Henry David Thoreau wrote while he was in prison. They take it a little too far sometimes. Transcendentalism on the individual at home kind of basis is kind of cool because it gets you examining, you know, is it really okay for me to have that chai latte, even though it means a disposable straw? Like that transcendental attitude is like an all day, every day kind of thing. I'm only making it because she said she had a non-disposable straw. So that is something she thinks about. That's the only reason I'm picking on her. Anyway, but so you living as a transcendentalist means examining everything in your life and going, am I harming somebody by doing this? Should I recycle that bottle? Should I do this? You know, building a whole community of people to live in transcendental meditation basically didn't work out very well. In 1825, New Harmony was a community that was built for transcendentalists to come and live. And you know what they found out about transcendentalists? They don't like to garden. They don't like to clean. They don't like to work. They want to meditate on their spirits, and they want everything else kind of done for them. So that community kind of falls apart because nobody wants to be the one in charge. Nobody feels the right to take leadership over anybody else because, you know, we're all striving here. And so it kind of falls apart on that basis. The Oneida community is much scarier because they actually start practicing things like birth control and free love, because who is it up to decide whether it's right for you to be intimate with other people? Yourself, right? If it feels right to you, then whose law is going to make it? But while we're at it, let's make sure that we are still having children. And while we're at it, we'll use the best of those among us to grow the children that are perfect. So that's called eugenics. When you try to put couples together and make them have children based on the traits that they have so that they will have the best children. So you take like the smartest person from over here and the prettiest person from over there, put them together in the hopes of having an extremely smart and pretty child. That's eugenics. It was an experiment in eugenics, and it didn't work out because basically because other communities protested them because they thought they were just, you know, orgying all the time, which might have been true. But the biggest religion of this era that comes out that makes a big difference to America is the Mormons. In the 1820s, John Smith had a revelation, possibly a hallucination, but probably a revelation, I don't really know. I don't study Mormonism. That revealed to him that there was a whole new gospel that had taken place in America and that he could uncover it and then make it and spread it to others. That new gospel, which is the Latter-day Saints. I don't know if any of y'all Mormons? Do we have Mormons in our world here? No? Zoom, any of y'all Mormons? Church of Latter-day Saints?
Nope.
No.
No? Okay. Yeah, it's split off into a bunch of different trees, but the original intention was to embrace this new gospel, which added a new chapter to the disciples, you know, right beyond what was in the New Testament, and I had some new messages that were very different from what, you know, the mainstream Christian church believed. Kind of like Islam in that respect, a new chapter that adds a whole different level of new things. Joseph Smith was actually killed by an angry mob in 1844. They tried to move the Mormons to where they could be, you know, religiously free. And everywhere they went, they kind of met resistance. They were not peaceful people exactly. They were gun-toting people. So they fought when they were chased out. They didn't just, you know, but at the same time, they were being pushed out for their religion, you know, which is supposed to be against the Constitution. In 1844, Joseph Smith was killed by an angry mob and Brigham Young took over. In 1847, Brigham Young led the Mormons out to Utah, where they found a place called that is now Salt Lake City, which Brigham Young claimed had been promised to them, you know.
Everything there is Mormon.
But, and yeah, if you want to find where all the Mormons are, you know, that's where the Mormon sort of headquarters is, Brigham Young University in Salt Lake City. That's kind of where they come from. They had some practices that made it so that wherever they lived, people didn't like them. One of them was polygamy. I don't remember, I think I've got it in my notes somewhere how many wives Brigham Young actually had, but I don't want to go look for it. So somebody Google it for me. How many wives did Brigham Young have? Because it was a lot. And sometimes that polygamy stretched into minor age children, and it became an ugly thing. We're still kind of dealing with that a little bit. 55 wives, yes. At a certain point, you're like, but why? Because weirdly, it didn't work the other way. Mormon women didn't have multiple husbands because that was biblical, I guess. I don't know.
And that lasted all the way up to the mid-1980s.
Right.
Oh,
Oh, yeah, because it's over now?
well, it's not over now.
Yeah, I don't think so. That's an interesting question. I can take like 2 minutes to discuss that. Based on what you know of the Constitution, why is polygamy illegal? Anybody?
I don't think there's actually a reason why.
Yeah, who gets to make laws about marriage?
They're using the Bible now.
No, but who gets to make the laws? Who gets to decide how laws? Mm. It is the executive branch, but which part of the executive branch?
Supreme Court, right?
No, it would be like the House.
It's the states.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
so it's the legislative and executive branches of the
Of
states.
the state.
Right, so if a state decided to legalize polygamy,
Now, why is it legal in Utah?
it's not legal in Utah.
What about that guy that has the sister wives? What state is he?
Technically, he's not married to them.
Oh,
So there's loopholes for people that want to live polygamously or polyamorously. For people that want to live in marriages with multiple partners, there are loopholes, but it is still illegal to be polygamous in all 50 states. What part of the Constitution does that come from? It ain't there.
I'm just saying.
It's in the state constitutions. It's not in the federal constitution, and it's based on. So eventually, it's probably going to be legalized everywhere because people are going to start scratching their heads and going, "Why are we even regulating this?" Because it's a ball that rolls downhill, right? If you start legalizing polygamous marriage, then you're basically saying forced marriage to minors is also okay. But it's not actually saying that. Consenting relationship between multiple adults should be something that should be negotiable through the Constitution. The reason it's checked is because of the Bible. But in the Bible, they have multiple marriages.
Yeah, but it's not all.
So I don't know. I've always been curious about that. Because like, you know, I personally opt for a monogamous relationship with a spouse of the opposite sex, but I don't know why that's the standard for everybody. I'm not sure.
There are certain pedophiles that are trying to get themselves into the LGBT community.
No, that's what we call a false flag.
Yeah,
The LGBT community does not include pedophiles because in order to be included, you have to have consenting relationships. So anyway, so why does all of this matter to American history? Why do we need to talk about Romanticism and this movement? How does it affect the landscape? Well, usually I do this lecture later. I do this lecture after we're starting to really get towards the Civil War. So I have some reasons why it's going to matter towards the Civil War, but it's actually going to hit much sooner than that. Transcendentalism causes people to examine themselves and form societies for self-examination, and those societies take on purposes. For example, transcendentalism causes people to start thinking about things like temperance. Y'all know what temperance is? You know this word, temperance? Okay, temperance is anti-alcoholism. Okay, you want to temper your alcohol intake. And what did we talk about the other day when we were talking about immigrants? What was it almost all the immigrants had in common? They drank, yes. So suddenly, because of transcendentalism and romanticism, suddenly there's a rise in this idea of temperance. And they form little societies with how do we make temperance happen? Because of transcendentalism, you have societies that are pro treating the natives with respect, you know, because they've examined themselves and they've found other people that think just like them. And they think maybe the way that the natives got treated might have been wrong. And so they formed societies to reach out into the natives and provide them with schools and, you know, help it on the reservations and stuff. Transcendental societies take on all kinds of issues. In the North, one of the biggest ones is abolitionism. Now, we've had people since the beginning of American history who thought slavery should end. Most of them up until this point have been what you call manumission abolitionists, which really fits really well into a song lyric, manumission abolitionists. But anyway, that's in Hamilton, which none of y'all have watched for some reason. A manumission abolitionist is somebody who believes that slaves should be able to work their way out of slavery. But now we've got a rise in people who have examined themselves and feel like maybe all of slavery is wrong, and they form little societies, abolition societies, that want to just free the slaves, which would upset everything, but it would be the right thing to do because transcendentalism, because they've examined their spirits and they know in their hearts and they're following their emotions. So we have the beginning of abolitionist societies as a result of this. One romantic author that really begins to strike big during this time is Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was a slave who ran away from his master and managed to become educated. Once he was overhearing his master and his master's wife having a fight over him because his master's wife had started teaching him how to read. And his master said, don't teach him how to read. If you give that boy an education, he won't be fit to be a slave. And Frederick Douglass heard that and went, so that's how I get out of this. And he began to educate himself and managed to run away. And as one of the most educated people who had run away from slavery, he published his whole story, which was called My Bondage, My Freedom. And as he published that, it created fodder for these abolitionist societies to really hold on to. And Frederick Douglass never holds back. Somebody invited him to do a speech on the 4th of July once as come and be our special guest speaker for our big 4th of July celebration. We're going to have an Independence Day celebration celebrating our beautiful country. And he went, okay. And he got up and he gave this speech that was basically, you know that the slaves don't celebrate this day, right? And the whole speech was that. And nobody could do anything because he'd been invited as a speaker and they were too polite. So they sat there and just were like, oh, this is awkward. But his whole speech was, what to the slave is the 4th of July? How are we supposed to have a celebration of independence when so much of the country is in bondage? What is wrong with you people? Was basically the whole speech he gave. And he had a great following because of that. Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. Now, Harriet Beecher Stowe was a white woman from the North. And she wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin based on what she thought slavery was probably like. And a lot of people took offense at it because they're like, that's not anything like what slavery is like. White masters aren't like that, how dare you? But a lot of people who didn't know what slavery was like took Uncle Tom's Cabin and it became, this is what slavery is like. Now, there were cases that were harsher than what is in Uncle Tom's Cabin. There were many, many places where slaves were treated much worse than in Uncle Tom's Cabin, but there are also places where slaves were treated with respect-ish, sort of a form of respect. I don't think you can fully respect somebody and still hold them captive, but all over Europe, people read Uncle Tom's Cabin and were like, we should be ending slavery. This is something that should happen. Romanticism hits the South in a completely different way. What they grab onto is this idea of the hero, the white knight, the Lancelot. They actually take, the Lancelot story comes out in the Middle Ages, okay? It comes out in the court of King Richard the Lionheart. It's written during the court of King Richard the Lionheart. But they actually take the King Arthur story and rewrite it as Alfred Lord Tennyson rewrites it as this romance between Lancelot and Queen Guinevere, and how it's all about this conflicted feelings that everybody has. And as a result, the language of what is written in Lord Tennyson's story of King Arthur is all about knights and shining armor, saving lofty, putting queens up on pedestals and defending their armor. And that becomes the new version of chivalry. So if you ever heard somebody say chivalry is dead because somebody doesn't open a door, chivalry didn't have anything to do with that up until this happened. Before that, chivalry was about which knight on the battlefield could kick ass the hardest. That was all chivalry was. Chivalry was about your strength, about how many heads you could cut off in a single day. It became about men treating women as princesses and queens during the Romantic era in America. Okay? So, and where that really takes off is in the South. The idea of the South being this place where nobility still exists, where there are still knights on horseback, and they're beautiful ladies, the Southern belles, the princesses of the plantation, debutante balls, and all of these things are all a part of how Romanticism takes off in the South. But for the men, it's the idea of honor. We have to defend our honor and our nobility, and the how dare anybody ever, you know. So how are these two forces going to fight each other? What's going to happen when these two different flavors of Romanticism face off with each other? Anybody? What do you think? Heads is what they're going to butt? I don't think so. Okay, so you'll have the people who swear that the only right thing is to end slavery, and the people who swear that the right thing to do is defend this land of nobility and honor and structure and aristocracy. And those two forces are going to come head to head with each other, thanks to Romanticism. Okay,